Here's something that should bother you. The most powerful families in the world, the ones who have shaped governments, built institutions, funded universities, and quietly controlled industries for generations. You barely know their names, not because they're hiding, because they chose not to be found. Meanwhile, the loudest voices online are begging for your attention every single day. New cars, new watches, new flex, and they'll be gone in 5 years. Old money doesn't play that game. It never did. And the question you should be asking isn't why they stay out of the spotlight. The question is, what are they doing while everyone else is distracted, performing wealth for strangers on the internet? That's what this video is about. Stay with me, because by the end, the way you think about power and influence will never be the same. Most people think influence looks like reach, like followers, like visibility. They think the most powerful person in the room is the loudest one, the one with the biggest platform, the flashiest car, the most recognizable face. That is not how old money thinks. Old money understands something most people spend their entire lives never figuring out. Real influence is invisible by design. Think about it this way. If you have to announce your power, you don't actually have it. Power that needs to be performed is power that can be taken away the moment the performance stops. But power that is embedded in relationships, institutions, networks, and reputation built over decades, that doesn't disappear when the algorithm changes. It doesn't collapse when the market dips. It doesn't evaporate when someone with a bigger following comes along. This is the first and most important distinction between old money and new money. New money buys attention. Old money builds access. And access is the one currency that doesn't devalue. Now let's break down exactly how they do it. Because this isn't abstract philosophy. There are specific observable behaviors, systems, and strategies that old money families have used for generations to build influence without ever needing to be seen doing it. 1. The silence strategy. Let's start with the most counterintuitive one. Old money is deeply, deliberately, strategically quiet. Not because they're shy, not because they're modest, but because silence, in the right context, communicates more than noise ever could. Here's the psychology behind it. When you speak constantly, you reveal constantly. You reveal what you know, what you don't know, what you want, what you fear. The more you share, the more leverage others gain over you. Old money families understood this centuries ago. The aristocratic tradition of restraint in speech, the emphasis on listening over talking. This wasn't social etiquette for its own sake. It was a power strategy. When you don't reveal your hand, people fill in the gaps with their imagination. And imagination is almost always more impressive than reality. The person who speaks rarely but deliberately is assumed to be thinking at a higher level than everyone else in the room. Whether or not that's true is almost irrelevant. The perception of depth creates influence on its own. But there's more to it than just talking less. Old money practices what you could call strategic withdrawal. They are rarely the most visible person in any public setting, but they are almost always the most connected. They attend, they observe, they cultivate, and then they quietly leave before the cameras arrive. Think of the families that sit on the boards of major museums, universities, and foundations. You won't see them at the opening night gala taking selfies. You'll see their name on a plaque on a building, and that plaque will outlast any post on any platform by 200 years. The lesson here isn't to become a recluse. It's to understand that your presence becomes more powerful when it's selective. If you're everywhere, you're valued nowhere. If you're rarely seen but always felt, through your decisions, your relationships, your reputation, that's when you've started to understand how old money builds influence. And speaking of reputation, let's talk about the single most important thing old money actually invests in, because it's not what you think. 2. Closed networks and the currency of access. Old money doesn't network. That word is too transactional for what they actually do. What old money builds is something far more valuable: closed, curated, multi-generational relationships. Think about the institutions that old money families have been deliberately placing themselves inside for centuries. The right boarding schools, the right universities, the right clubs, the right boards. These aren't just status symbols, they are access infrastructure. When your grandfather went to the same school as the man who now runs the central bank, when your family and his have attended the same summer retreat for 40 years, when your children grew up together, you don't need to cold call anyone. You don't need a LinkedIn message. You don't need an introduction. You already have access that no amount of new money can simply purchase. And here's what makes this system so durable. It is self-reinforcing. Old money families don't just enter these networks, they help maintain them. They donate to the institutions. They sit on the selection committees. They mentor the next generation of members, which means they have a say in who gets access and who doesn't. This is why you see the same surnames cycling through positions of influence across generations. It's not nepotism in the crude sense. It's the compounding return on a multi-decade relationship investment. Now here's the part that's actually actionable for anyone watching this, regardless of where you started. The principle underneath all of this is one you can apply right now. Invest in relationships before you need them. Old money doesn't cultivate relationships when they want something. They cultivate them constantly, generously, and with a long-term view. They show up for people. They remember details. They introduce people to each other without expecting anything in return. And over decades, that behavior creates a network so dense and so loyal that influence flows through it naturally, without anyone having to announce it or demand it. Before we go further, if this is making you think differently about how influence and wealth actually work, do me a favor and hit subscribe. We go deep on old money lifestyle, wealth mindset, and the things most people never learn about how generational wealth actually operates. You won't find this level of detail anywhere else. All right, back to it. 3. Institutions as instruments of influence. Here's where old money separates itself from every other category of wealth. And this is one of the most important things in this entire video. Old money doesn't just use institutions. It builds them, funds them, and shapes them. And in doing so, it shapes the values, the access, and the future direction of entire societies. Let's be specific. When an old money family donates a wing to a hospital, funds a chair at a university, or establishes a foundation, they are not simply being charitable. They are embedding themselves into a structure that will carry their influence long after they are gone. That university chair will shape the thinking of students for 100 years. That hospital wing will be attended by the region's most prominent doctors. That foundation will decide which causes receive funding and which don't. This is soft power at its most sophisticated level. No press release required. No social media announcement needed. Just a name on a building and a seat at every major table that building ever hosts. And because it's framed as generosity, because it is genuine generosity in many cases, it can't be criticized the way overt power can. Old money learned long ago that the most durable form of influence is the kind that makes people grateful to you. The new money version of this is throwing a party and posting about it. The old money version is endowing a scholarship that produces grateful, loyal, well-placed alumni for the next 2 centuries. One creates a moment. The other creates a legacy. 4. Restraint as a status signal. Let's talk about something more visible, the way old money presents itself physically, because the 75 old money style and the whole 70 quiet luxury movement that's exploded online isn't just an aesthetic, it's a communication system. Old money dresses quietly on purpose. No logos, no obvious luxury signaling, no look-at-me energy in clothing, in cars, in homes. The yacht is modest by billionaire standards. The watch is a simple Patek that your grandfather owned. The car is understated and well-maintained, but not flashy. Why? Because when you wear a giant logo, you are signaling to the world, I can afford this brand, and I need you to know that. Old money has no such need. They are not trying to convince anyone of their status. Their status is self-evident to the people who matter, and they have no interest in convincing anyone else. This restraint does something psychologically powerful. It creates a sense of mystery and security around old money that new money cannot replicate by spending more. The more someone ostentatiously displays wealth, the more it reads as insecurity. The more someone is effortlessly understated, the more the imagination fills in the rest. There's a reason the 70 quiet wealth and 60 stealth wealth aesthetic has gone viral. People are beginning to intuitively understand what old money has always known. The most powerful thing you can do is make people feel like they're missing something, without ever telling them what it is. And restraint isn't just about clothing. It applies to opinion, to emotion, to reaction. Old money doesn't rage tweet, doesn't get publicly drawn into disputes, doesn't respond to every provocation, because reacting emotionally in public gives your power away. Composure, especially under pressure, is one of the oldest and most effective influence signals in human social history. 5. The long game versus the spotlight. Here's something that fundamentally separates old money thinking from the culture most of us were raised in. Old money plays in decades. The rest of the world plays in days. Every major decision, where children go to school, which boards to sit on, which philanthropic causes to back, which families to cultivate relationships with, is evaluated not just for what it produces this year, but for what it produces in 20 years, 50 years, 100 years. This is almost incomprehensible in a world optimized for quarterly results and 48-hour news cycles. But it is precisely because most people can't think that far ahead that old money's long-term positioning is so dominant. Consider this. The families that funded universities 2 centuries ago now have their names embedded in the most powerful academic institutions on Earth. Those institutions shape policy, produce leaders, and generate research that influences governments worldwide. That 200-year-old investment is still paying dividends in influence, in access, in reputation, every single day. When you're playing that long a game, you don't need to win every news cycle. You don't need to trend. You don't need to be the loudest voice in the room today because you've already positioned yourself to be the only voice in the room that matters in 30 years. This is why old money families are so calm. They're not calm because nothing bothers them. They're calm because their sense of security isn't tied to what happened this week. It's tied to something that took generations to build and will take generations to undo. That calmness, by the way, is itself a form of influence. In any high-stakes conversation, the calmest person in the room shapes the energy of everyone else. Old money knows this instinctively, and it's trained into every generation from childhood. 6. The name versus the noise. Here's the final and perhaps most powerful piece of how old money builds invisible influence. The name, not the personal brand, not the channel, not the following, the family name and everything it silently communicates the moment it enters a room. Old money spends generations building a name that precedes them, a name that, when it appears on a guest list, on a board, on a donation, signals a whole set of values, capabilities, and connections that no introduction could convey as efficiently. This is why old money is so protective of reputation. Not personal reputation in the ego sense, family reputation in the strategic sense. Every member of an old money family understands that their behavior reflects on a name that was built before they were born and must be handed on intact to the generation after them. That accountability is what keeps old money families disciplined across time, more than any individual motivation could. The contrast with new money is stark. New money builds a personal brand, and personal brands are fragile, trend-dependent, and mortal. Old money builds a family name, and family names, properly maintained, are effectively immortal. One fluctuates with the algorithm, the other compounds across centuries. So here's what all of this adds up to. Old money builds influence by doing the exact opposite of what modern culture tells you to do. It withdraws when the world says, show up. It stays quiet when the world says, speak. It invests in relationships, institutions, and reputation when the world says, invest in followers and content. And it works, generation after generation. Not in spite of the restraint, because of it. You don't have to be born into old money to adopt this mindset. But you do have to be willing to play a longer, quieter, more intentional game than almost everyone around you is willing to play. If this gave you a new way of thinking about wealth and influence, subscribe, because we go deeper on this every week. And drop a comment below. Which part of the old money approach surprised you most? I'll see you in the next one.